and power, which will not only be founded in actual military superiority, but only on the appearance of it. And in these days, when popular newspapers, appealing with authority to countless readers, are prepared almost every morning to urge us into war against one or other, and sometimes several, of the great powers of the earth, surely we ought not to make it seem so easy and even attractive to embark on such terrible enterprises, or to think that with the land forces at our disposal we may safely intermeddle in the European game? What is our weapon, then? The only weapon with which we can expect to cope with great nations is the navy. This is what the Chief Secretary to the Lord Lieutenant calls "trust to luck and the navy policy." I confess I do trust the navy. This new distrust of the navy, a kind of shrinking from our natural element, the blue water on which we have ruled so long, is the most painful symptom of the military hydrophobia with which we are afflicted. Without a supreme navy, whatever military arrangements we may make, whether for foreign expeditions or home defense, must be utterly vain and futile. With such a navy we may hold any antagonist at arm's length, and feed ourselves in the meantime, until, if we find it necessary, we can turn every city in the country into an arsenal, and the whole male population into an army. Sir, the superiority of the navy is vital to our national existence. That has been said before. No one will deny that or thank me for repeating the obvious. Yet this tremendous army expenditure directly challenges the principle, and those who advocate it are false to the principle they so loudly proclaim. For the main reason that enables us to maintain the finest navy in the world is that whereas every European power has to support a vast army first of all, we in this fortunate, happy island, relieved by our insular position of a double burden, may turn our undivided efforts and attention to the fleet. Why should we sacrifice a game in which we are sure to win to play a game in which we are bound to lose? For the same rule most certainly has a converse application, and just as foreign powers, by reason of their pressing land responsibilities, must be inferior to us at sea, so we, whatever our effort, whatever our expenditure, by reason of our paramount sea responsibilities, must be inferior to them on land. And surely to adopt the double policy of equal effort both on the army and navy, spending 30 millions on each, is to combine the disadvantages and dangers of all courses without the advantages or security of any, and to run the risk of crashing to the ground between two stools, with a navy uselessly weak and an army uselessly strong. We are told we have commitments, not a very cheerful expression, in 3 continents, and that it is in consequence of these commitments that we must keep 3 army corps ready for immediate expeditionary purposes. On what principle are there to be 3 rather than 2 or 8? I had hoped that the formulation of some definite principle governing our military needs would be a prominent feature of any scheme of army reform submitted to the nation. I suppose the principle on which the Army Corps have been selected is 1 continent, 1 Army Corps. Well, sir, I should like to look into that. In the first place, there is Asia. What is our danger there? Of course, it is an Anglo-Russian war on the frontier of India, but if anyone takes Lord Salisbury's advice, and sometimes he gives very good advice, to use large-scale maps of Central Asia, they will see that any Russian enterprise against India would either have to be made with a small force, in which case our Indian army would be sufficient to resist it, or else railways would have to be built, just as Lord Kitchener had to build a railway to Khartoum, to feed the great invading forces in the barren lands through which they must march, in which case we should have plenty of time to levy and train as many British troops as we might think fit. Then we have a commitment in North America, a commitment which is growing more able to take care of itself every day, not a commitment about which we need feel much anxiety. Sir, we must not, however, shrink from the responsibility. Of course, the danger which might assail us in this quarter of the globe would only be a war with the great friendly commercial nation to the southward. Evil would be the counselors, dark would be the day when we embarked on that most foolish, futile, and fatal of all wars, a war with the United States. But if such a fit of madness should attack the Anglo-Saxon family, then I say both nations, having long enjoyed a glorious immunity from the curse of militarism, would be similarly placed, and no decisive events could be looked for until the war had been in progress for a year or two, and enormous armies had been raised by both sides. And in this war, as in any other war of this kind, your 3 army corps would be merely the first few drops of the thunder shower. We shall be told, the lesson of the South African War must not be forgotten. We must profit by our experience in South Africa, and be prepared next time for all eventualities. The present scheme of army increase is justified mainly on the ground of our experience in South Africa. We must be ready next time, says the man in the street. Not for worlds would I speak disrespectfully of the man in the street, but, sir, in the first place, I cannot help hoping next time may be a long way off. I trust the government do not contemplate fighting these wars in South Africa septennially. I trust they will finish this one in such a style that future recurrence will be utterly impossible, and that an end will be made once and for all of dangers from within that continent. Dangers from without can never exist in that quarter so long as we preserve our naval supremacy. Once that is lost, such dangers would be dwarfed by greater catastrophes at home. But I will not look only to the future. I have no hesitation in asserting that even if this scheme had been carried into effect 5 years ago, and we had had our 3 expeditionary army corps ready for foreign service in October 1899, even then the course of the South African War would not have been materially different. You would have had your 3 army corps ready, but would the possession of those 3 army corps have told the intelligence officers and the general staff and the Committee of National Defense that more than 1 army corps was needed? And even if they had advised that 3 army corps should be sent forthwith, that would not have been enough, for, as we know to our cost, not 3 army corps were needed, but 6. See what inadequate security this scheme provides if we are to embark on land enterprises against civilized peoples. The Boers were the smallest of all civilized nations, yet this precious army scheme, in spite of the 30 millions a year it is to cost, does not provide half the troops needed to conquer them. And if this scheme were carried into effect, as many people think it cannot be carried into effect, and the South African War were to begin over again, you would again have to call on volunteers, yeomanry, and militia to alter their original contract with the state and serve beyond the seas. Yes, against this, the smallest of all civilized nations, we should have to fall back in these emergencies on the power of unrestricted sea communication, the wealth of a commercial country, and the patriotic and warlike impulses of a people not wearied of the military yoke. The armies of Europe are bigger than those of the Boers, and cheaper than our own. France, in this present year, for an expenditure of 28 millions, can mobilize 20 army corps. Germany, for 26 millions, gets 22 army corps. Russia, for 32 millions, can set on foot, including 23 regular army corps, a total force estimated at over 3 millions of men. And what can Great Britain do? Taught by the experience of the South African War, rich in her commerce and the generosity of her people, guided by the unfailing instinct of the War Office, Great Britain would be defended, after this scheme has been carried into effect, by no fewer than 3 trained army corps and 3 partly trained army corps. And for this she must pay 2 millions a year more than France, 4 millions a year more than Germany, and within 2 millions of the total cost of the whole great Russian army. But in spite of every explanatory circumstance, after every allowance has been made, One great truth glows and glares in our faces, veil it how we may. Standing armies